Today's episode of Variant is brought to you by Squarespace. Today on Variant, I give you the history of the Punisher. Welcome to Variant, where we love comics more than I'm excited to watch Daredevil Season 2. I'm your host, Arris. Now, I know we are currently in the middle of DC month here at Variant, but with Daredevil Season 2 releasing later this week on Netflix, there was no way I wasn't going to talk about one of the biggest aspects of this season, the Punisher. So today I'm going to give you guys the history of the Punisher, which will go along quite nicely with the history of Daredevil episode I did last year for Daredevil Season 1. But today, however, it's all about the Punisher. Let's start this off with how the Punisher was created. The Punisher was conceived by Gerry Conway, writer of The Amazing Spider-Man at the time, who helped design the character's distinctive costume. Conway stated in 2002 that in the 70s, when I was writing comics at DC and Marvel, I made it a practice to sketch my own ideas for the costumes of the new characters, heroes, and villains, which I offered to the artist as a crude suggestion representing the image I had in my mind. I had done that with the Punisher at Marvel. Conway had drawn a small skull on one breast. Then Marvel art director John Romita Sr. took the basic design, blew the skull up so that it took up most of the character's chest. And just like that, we have the classic Punisher design from which all other Punisher designs are based off of. Now that's how Punisher got his costume, but why was he created and how did he get his name? Well, Stan Lee, Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time, once stated that he suggested his name. Stan said that Gerry Conway was writing a script and he wanted a character that would turn out to be a hero later on, and he came up with the name, the Assassin. Stan then mentioned that he didn't think they could ever have a comic book where the hero would be called the Assassin, because there's just too much negative connotation to that word. But then Stan remembered that some time ago he had a relatively unimportant character who was one of Galactus's robots, that he called the Punisher. Stan then thought it would be a good name for Gerry's new character. So he said, why not call him the Punisher? And since Stan Lee was the editor, Gerry said okay. And just like that, my friends, the Punisher was born, making his first appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 129 in February of 1974. In this issue, Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, debuted as a vigilante assassin hired by the Jackal to kill Spider-Man for the apparent murder of Norman Osborn. As differences between Punisher and Jackal came to a head, Punisher realized that he was being tricked into killing Spider-Man, and that our friendly neighborhood web-slinger was not in fact a criminal or a murderer. The Punisher is portrayed as a bloodthirsty vigilante who has no qualms about killing gangsters, something that most superheroes of the time refrained from doing. J. Jonah Jameson describes him as the most newsworthy thing to happen in New York since Boss Tweed. The Punisher has most often been defined best over the years as a loner and someone who other characters don't often align themselves with. He is the true definition of an anti-hero operating outside the moral codes of most superheroes, but with a strict code of his own that is to protect the innocent and to deal with criminals permanently. With no superpowers, he relies on strict discipline and a punishing regimen of learning the hard way from his mistakes. As a result, he is a masterful combatant and strategist. The Punisher didn't get his own series until 1986, after Mike Zeck and Stephen Grant suggested that he was worthy of a title, and thus began the legendary journey of one of the most popular Marvel characters ever. When the Punisher made the leap from support character to solo character in 1986, he was unlike anything Marvel fans had ever seen before in a hero. He had a black and white costume with a skull as opposed to a brightly colored costume as worn by pretty much every other character in the Marvel universe. It showed that this character was a lot darker than others. As time went on and the Punisher began to tussle not only with more dangerous criminals, but also with heroes such as Daredevil and Spider-Man and supervillains like Doctor Doom and Kingpin, he became more and more rough around the edges, more aggressive, and his stories gained more depth by inviting the readers into his fractured psychology. It seemed that he may not be the hero people expected, but possibly a ticking time bomb of a tragic man attempting to change the unchangeable. 2 years after Grant and Zeck's popular debut of the Punisher solo series, the War Journal series was introduced and the character exploded in terms of popularity and could be found literally everywhere. Aside from War Journal, there was also Punisher Warzone, Punisher POV, and Punisher Armory, among others. Punisher was so popular that aside from making many appearances beside Wolverine, Spider-Man, Daredevil, and Ghost Rider, he also appeared in a crossover with Batman. The character had a lot of trouble in the 90s, with so many controversial and absurd stories destroying his fan base. And around the mid-90s, when Marvel went bust, he was one of so many characters who seemed to have fallen into a slump. That wasn't until Garth Ennis picked up the character for the new imprint that was darker and grittier, Marvel Knights, which made all of us love the Punisher once again. Now that's Punisher's brief history over the years, but I've yet to talk about his comic book origin, which we see in Punisher Year 1, so I'm gonna do that, like right now. Frank Castle was a dedicated US Marine excelling as a soldier in every way. He was a force to be reckoned with during the Vietnam War, but also a dedicated family man. After a close call in the final years of the war, he resigned to a Special Forces instructor post in upstate New York so that he could be closer to his wife Maria and his two kids, Lisa and Francis. But disaster struck one day years later when Frank and his family went for a picnic in Central Park, only to witness a mob execution on a high-profile member of the mafia. The mob fired on his family, killing them all before his very eyes, thus destroying everything he lived for. He becomes suicidal and seeks justice through the law, but after he discovers a trend of corruption that makes it impossible for him to do right by the memories of his wife and kids, Castle goes off the rails and decides to take matters into his own hands. Long story short, Frank ended up talking with a sympathetic detective who hinted that equipment and weapons were in his car's trunk, and that he wouldn't be surprised if someone broke in and took everything. So of course Frank got that hint and took all the supplies, and he puts on a bulletproof vest, which he paints the now iconic white skull on, becoming the Punisher. The story also features Billy Russo. The Costa mob hired him to kill Castle, but he failed. Castle tracks down Russo, but lets Russo live to tell the rest of the Costa mob that he was coming for them. Castle then pushed Russo through a window, disfiguring his face. This is what disfigured Billy Russo's face, which later led to him becoming the Punisher's enemy, Jigsaw. With Punisher's origin out of the way, let's talk about some of his training and abilities. Castle has an extensive background with weapons and hand-to-hand combat and is in peak physical condition. His missions are always well planned and carried out with the utmost preparation and attention to detail. He is able to access and adapt to just about any situation and turn it to his advantage using only his skills and killer instinct. He has a very high threshold for pain and is able to undergo surgery without any kind of anesthesia. He can take multiple gunshot hits, stab wounds, and still continue fighting. He can survive multiple explosions that would kill most humans, as well as take hits from superheroes and villains with superhuman strength and continue fighting. The Punisher's reflexes are second to none. He has been shown to be able to shoot Spider-Man, dodge Captain America's shield, and stun Daredevil with a tranq dart. And this should go without saying, but Punisher is a master with all forms of weaponry. But with all that said, this brings me to reading recommendations. You have Punisher Year 1, Punisher Circle of Blood, Punisher Welcome Back Frank, Punisher Max Born, and Punisher Max in the Beginning. Squarespace is the easiest way to create a beautiful website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features an elegant interface, beautiful templates, and incredible 24/7 customer support. They have intuitive and easy to use tools, and you get a free domain if you sign up for a year. Start building your website today at squarespace.com and enter the code VARIANTS at checkout to get 10% off. And remember, Squarespace, you should. So last Thursday, as we all know, Marvel released the second Captain America Civil War trailer, and ever since people have been asking me to give my thoughts on it, which is what I'm about to do. I would have given my thoughts sooner in a one-shot episode, but I was out of town, hence the delay. But it's better late than never. First off, if you've seen my one-shot review on the first Civil War trailer, then you know my thoughts on this new trailer, because this new trailer was just as good, if not better than the first. We get a better look at what causes the conflict in the movie, and what puts Iron Man and Captain America at odds. We also get a better look at all the characters in the movie, and they all look fantastic, especially Black Panther. He looks like a bamf. With all that said, let's talk about what everyone mainly cares about in this trailer, and that's Spider-Man making his Marvel Cinematic Universe debut at the end of this trailer. And even though he's in the trailer for like a total of 3 seconds, he looks freaking awesome. And even the 2 words he says, "Hey everyone," nails Spider-Man perfectly. His costume also looks really cool. It's essentially the classic Spider-Man costume with minor tweaks here and there. You can tell that his costume is gonna be like half CGI and half practical, which I'm completely fine with. I mean, that's what they do with Iron Man and Winter Soldier's arm, among other characters in the movie, and it looks great. The one thing I like most about his costume though is the fact that his eyes move, but they don't move without any explanation. If you look and listen closely, you can see that they will act like camera lenses and adjust/focus as needed. You can also hear them adjust as they get smaller. I think this is a perfect way to be able to give Spider-Man the expression in his eyes we love from the comics and cartoons, and it still makes some sort of sense. And this is just a guess, but I'm guessing Spider-Man's costume is given to him by Tony Stark. I know in the Civil War comics, Tony Stark gives Spider-Man his Iron Spider-Man costume, and as much as I would love to see that in this movie, I'm guessing Stark gives him this costume in the movie instead. I could be completely wrong, but that's just my guess. In summary, I'm loving everything I'm seeing from this movie, and Spider-Man looks great. It could be the best on-screen Spider-Man we've had thus far, especially since he's in Marvel Studios' hands, who has an amazing track record. First up, for Wednesday, March 16th, we have Superman issue 50. Superman returns in all his glory in this very special issue that sees the Man of Steel back to full power as he faces his greatest enemy. Now we have Robin, son of Batman, issue 10. Damian, Maya, Goliath, and their new friends seek out Talia al Ghul. And finally, we have Daredevil Punisher 7th Circle issue 2. Frank Castle's hunt has taken him on the road, and bodies will be left in his wake. And that brings yet another episode of Variant to a close. But remember, you can always like our Variant Facebook page to keep up with the show and all things comic related. You can also follow Variant on Twitter at Variant Comics or me on Twitter at Arris_Quinones. But I'll see you guys next week when I talk about all things comics. Get a better look at all the characters in the movie, and then they all look. Because what does Punisher do? Kill. What does Batman do? Not kill. When they collide, what happens?